It was over. That was the only thought I had. The axle was a splintered bone beneath the wagon, and the vast, uncaring Wyoming sky was the color of a bruise. We had nothing. Less than nothing. Hope had been the last thing to go, and it had bled out somewhere on the trail 10 miles back, leaving a silence that was heavier than any of our lost possessions. My sister, Eve, hadn't spoken in a day. She just sat on a cold rock, her arms wrapped around herself, her gaze fixed on the horizon that had promised us everything and given us only ruin. Gus, our old golden retriever, rested his heavy head on her lap. That alone told me more than anything else. He always knew which one of us was breaking. He would lie there, a warm, breathing anchor, until the shaking stopped. But the shaking wasn't stopping. It had taken root deep inside her, a tremor of the soul. I looked at the jagged peaks of the mountains clawing at the clouds. They were not majestic. They were teeth. A jawbone waiting to close. We had 2 biscuits, a half-empty canteen, and a flint and steel that had seen better days. The sun was sinking, and with it, the temperature. The wind had a sharp edge to it, a cruel whisper of the night to come. I felt a hollowness in my chest so vast it echoed. It was my fault. I had pushed us on. I had believed the letters from our cousin, believed in the dream of a new life out west. Now that dream was a corpse, and I had led my sister here to watch it die. I ran a hand over my face, the grit and grime a testament to our failure. I had to do something. Anything. My eye scanned the brutal landscape one last time, a prayer without words. And that's when I saw it. Not a miracle. Not a sign. Just a darkness. A peculiar patch of absolute black against the grey rock of the largest peak, like a mouth held open in a silent shout. It was a cave. A big one. It was a fool's hope, a shelter that might already be home to a bear or a wolf. But it was the only hope we had left. The climb was brutal. It wasn't far, but every foot of elevation was a victory paid for with burning lungs and trembling legs. I half-carried, half-coaxed Eve, who moved like a sleepwalker, her feet stumbling on the loose scree. Gus scrambled ahead, his tail low but his body language insistent, as if he too understood this was our final, desperate gamble. The air grew colder as we approached the opening, the wind funneling out of it with a low, mournful hum. The entrance was immense, a cathedral of shadow carved into the stone by millennia of wind and water. It was far larger than I had imagined from below, tall enough to swallow our broken wagon hole, wide enough for a whole herd of cattle to pass through. Stepping across the threshold was like entering another world. The wind died instantly. The silence was profound, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the deep dark. The light from the entrance didn't penetrate far, but it was enough to reveal the sheer scale of the place. The floor was surprisingly level, a floor of smooth, swept stone. The air smelled of damp earth, of cold rock, and something else. Something faint but unmistakable. Old wood. Pine. Gus padded forward, his nails clicking softly on the stone. He wasn't growling. He wasn't raising his hackles. He trotted deeper into the gloom, confident. I took Eve's hand. It was cold as ice. "Come on," I whispered, my voice sounding small in the vastness. We followed Gus, our eyes slowly adjusting to the dim light. The cavern curved gently, and as we rounded the first bend, the light from the entrance was cut off, replaced by a much softer, more ethereal glow. High above, a fissure in the cave ceiling allowed a single, brilliant shaft of late afternoon sun to pierce the darkness, illuminating the center of the cavern like a spotlight on a stage. And in the center of that light, it stood. It wasn't a shack. It wasn't a lean-to. It was a house. A proper log cabin, with a stone chimney and a pitched roof and glass in 2 small windows, built right here, in the heart of a mountain. It felt impossible, a dream conjured from our desperation. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. Eve made a small sound, the first in hours. A tiny, choked gasp of disbelief. The cabin was old, the wood weathered to a soft silver gray, but it was perfect. It looked like it had been waiting for us. For 100 years. We approached the cabin slowly, as if it might vanish if we moved too quickly. Gus was already there, sniffing at the base of the sturdy wooden door, his tail giving a single, tentative wag. The craftsmanship was simple but solid. The logs were expertly notched, the gaps chinked with a mixture of mud and moss that had long since hardened to the consistency of stone. Who would build this? And why here? The questions hung in the silent air, too large to grasp. My focus narrowed to the immediate. The door. It had a simple iron latch, rusted but intact. I placed my hand on it. Cold. Solid. I glanced at Eve. Her eyes, wide and luminous in the gloom, were fixed on the little house. For the first time since the axle broke, there was something other than terror in them. There was wonder. I took a deep breath and lifted the latch. It protested with a loud, grating screech that echoed through the cavern, a sound of long disuse. I pushed. The door resisted, swollen in its frame. I pushed harder, my shoulder pressed against the rough wood. It groaned, scraped against the stone floor, and then, with a final shudder, swung inward. The air that billowed out was stale, thick with the dust of years, but it was dry. It was the smell of shelter. Inside, it was even darker. I fumbled in my satchel for the flint and the small nub of a candle we had left. My hands were shaking, but this time it was with anticipation, not fear. I struck the flint against the steel. Once. Twice. A spark caught on the wick. A tiny, precious flame bloomed, pushing back the oppressive dark. I held it up. The cabin was a single room. In the center stood a simple wooden table and 2 chairs. Against the far wall was a stone fireplace, deep and black, with a small pile of wood still resting beside it, as if its owner had just stepped out. And in the corner was a bed frame, topped with a mattress stuffed with what looked like dried grasses, a folded, thick wool blanket resting on top. It wasn't much. But it was everything. Gus walked straight to the worn rug in front of the fireplace, circled 3 times, and lay down with a heavy sigh, his body instantly relaxing. He was home. I looked at Eve, my heart aching with a fragile, burgeoning hope. I held the candle out towards her. The little flame danced in her eyes. "We're safe," I said. It felt like the truest thing I had ever spoken. She didn't answer, but she stepped across the threshold, out of the cave and into the little house. And somehow, that felt like an oath. We were no longer lost. We were found. The initial wave of relief was a powerful tide, but as the last of the sun's light vanished from the fissure high above, a new reality set in. The cold. It was a deep, penetrating cold that emanated from the stone all around us, a cold that the cabin's wooden walls could soften but not defeat. The little nub of candle cast flickering, monstrous shadows on the walls and provided almost no warmth. The fireplace stood there, a promise of salvation, but a promise we couldn't yet claim. The wood beside it was bone dry, a small miracle, but our flint and steel was a fickle tool, and our supply of tinder was non-existent. The biscuits were gone, shared in 3 solemn bites each, and the water in the canteen was low. The gnawing ache in my stomach was a familiar enemy, but the cold was a new and more immediate threat. Eve had pulled the thick wool blanket from the bed and wrapped it around her shoulders, but she was still shivering, her face pale in the faint candlelight. I knew that if we didn't get a fire going, the hope that had flickered to life in this place would be extinguished by the morning. I couldn't let that happen. "I'll be right back," I told her, my voice more confident than I felt. "Stay with Gus," she just nodded, her eyes huge and dark. Leaving the fragile warmth of the cabin felt like stepping off a cliff. The cavern was now a pit of absolute blackness. The only sound was the incessant, rhythmic drip of water, a sound that now seemed less like a heartbeat and more like a clock ticking down our chances. I held the candle high, its tiny halo of light seeming pathetic against the immense, swallowing dark. I needed kindling. Dry grass, moss, anything that would take a spark. My gaze fell on the bed. The mattress. It was stuffed with dry grasses. It would be a sacrifice, tearing apart the only comfortable thing in the cabin, but warmth was more important than comfort. I returned to the cabin, set the candle on the table, and knelt by the bed. I found a small tear in the ticking and pulled out a handful of the stuffing. It was brittle, dusty, and perfectly dry. I took a deep breath and carried the precious handful over to the hearth. This had to work. We had one chance. My hands trembled as I arranged the grass into a small, airy nest. I placed the smallest, driest twigs on top, building a tiny log pile for a mouse. Then I took the flint and steel. The silence in the room was absolute, save for Eve's shallow breathing. The whole world had shrunk to this single, desperate task. I knelt before the stone hearth, the small nest of dried grass looking impossibly fragile. The cold of the stone floor seeped through my trousers, a constant reminder of what would happen if I failed. I took the flint in one hand, the C-shaped steel in the other. My knuckles were white. I took a breath, held it, and struck. A pathetic spark flew wide, dying in the darkness. Again. A short, bright arc that vanished instantly. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was so much harder than Father had made it look. His big, calloused hands had always made it seem so simple, a flick of the wrist and a shower of brilliant orange stars. My hands were small, cold, and clumsy. I glanced over at Eve. She was watching me, her face a mask of quiet tension. I could not fail her. I closed my eyes for a second, picturing it. Picturing the way Father held the steel, the angle of the flint. I adjusted my grip. I brought the stone down against the metal with a sharp, focused motion. A single, fat spark landed squarely in the center of the grassy nest. It glowed for a second. A tiny, red eye in the dark. Then it began to smoke. I leaned forward, my face close to the stone, and blew. Not a gasp, not a puff, but a long, steady, gentle stream of air, just as I'd been taught. The red eye winked, then grew. A thin ribbon of grey smoke curled upwards, smelling of dry fields and sunlight. I kept blowing, my vision starting to swim from the effort. The smoke thickened. Then, with a soft whoosh, a tiny, hungry tongue of flame erupted from the nest. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I didn't stop. I gently added the smallest twigs, one by one, feeding the infant fire, nursing it, protecting it. It licked at the wood, hesitated, then caught. The flames grew, small at first, then more confident, casting a warm, dancing light across the room. I finally sat back on my heels, my body trembling with relief. The fire crackled, a cheerful, living sound in the immense silence. It was a victory. A real one. The warmth began to push back the oppressive cold, chasing the shadows into the corners. I looked at Eve. A tear was tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek, but she was smiling. A real, watery, heartbreaking smile. Gus got up, stretched, and resettled himself closer to the hearth, sighing with pure canine contentment. We had light. We had warmth. It wasn't much. But it was enough. The fire changed everything. It was more than just warmth, it was a beacon. It made the small cabin a sanctuary, a pocket of life in the ancient, sleeping stone. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, we slept. Not the fitful, fearful dozing of the trail, but a deep, restorative slumber, cocooned in the fire's gentle glow. We woke to the strange, muted light filtering down from the fissure high above. The air was still cold, but the chill was no longer a threat. It was just a fact of our new world. With the immediate danger of freezing past, our hunger returned with a vengeance. We had nothing. The first few days were a blur of methodical exploration. I left Eve and Gus in the cabin, a warm and solid anchor, and ventured into the cavern. The dripping sound led me to a slow, steady seep of water from a crack in the rock face, clean and tasting of stone. We would not go thirsty. That was the second victory. For food, I had to be more creative. I scavenged what was left in our ruined wagon, salvaging a pot, a knife, and a small bag of beans. Not enough, but a start. The real discovery came from Gus. On the third day, he began whining and scratching at a pile of loose rock near the back of the main cavern. Curious, I started digging. Beneath the rocks was a small, dark tunnel, just big enough to crawl through. A cold draft flowed from it. Gus was adamant. I took a burning branch for a torch and crawled inside. The tunnel opened into another, smaller chamber, this one damp and earthy. And it was full of mushrooms. Pale, ghostly things growing in dense clusters. I knew enough from our father to recognize them as safe. We feasted that night on beans and roasted mushrooms, a meal so rich and satisfying it felt like a king's banquet. Slowly, I saw Eve begin to unfurl. She started helping, her movements less like an automaton and more like a person. She would sweep the floor, organize our meager supplies, and keep the fire fed while I was gone. One afternoon, I returned from the mushroom cave to find her sitting by the fire, talking to Gus in a low, soft voice. It was the most she had spoken in weeks. That evening, as the fire danced and threw shadows on the walls, Gus, full and content, suddenly sat up, stared at his own tail, and began to chase it in a tight, ridiculous circle. He was usually such a dignified old dog. The sight was so unexpected, so absurd, that a sound escaped Eve's lips. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. It startled both of us. Her eyes went wide, her hand flying to her mouth as if to catch it. But then I started to laugh, a low, rusty sound. And she laughed again, a real, full-bodied laugh that filled the little cabin with a sound it probably hadn't heard in a century. For the first time in a long time, we weren't just surviving. We were home. The laughter opened something up in us, a space for more than just survival. We began to truly inhabit the cabin, to make it our own. The daily rhythms of gathering water, tending the fire, and foraging for mushrooms became a comforting routine, not a desperate scramble. We cleaned every inch of the single room, scrubbing the wooden walls until they glowed in the firelight, polishing the 2 small window panes until they gleamed, though they looked out on nothing but the dim, grey stone of the cave wall. It was during this cleaning that we found it. The bed was heavy, made of solid pine, and we decided to move it away from the wall to sweep the dust of ages from behind it. As I lifted one corner and Eve lifted the other, we heard a soft, hollow sound. I stopped. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Eve nodded, her eyes curious. I knelt and ran my hand along the floorboards where the leg of the bed had been. Most were solid, but one felt different. It was slightly loose. I worked my fingernails into the crack and pried. The board lifted easily, revealing a small, dark cavity beneath the floor. My heart began to beat a little faster. Tucked inside the space was a small, tin box, the kind used for tea or tobacco. It was not locked. It was cool to the touch, and when I lifted it out, it was surprisingly heavy. We carried it to the table and sat down, the box between us like a silent oracle. Gus padded over and rested his chin on my knee, as if he, too, needed to see what secrets the house held. My hands were steady as I lifted the lid. There was no gold, no money. The box was filled with objects, each one carefully wrapped in oilcloth. I unwrapped the first. It was a small, leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with handling. The pages were filled with a neat, elegant script. I unwrapped another. A set of drafting tools, a compass, a ruler, a protractor, all made of brass that had tarnished to a deep bronze. And finally, at the bottom, a small, heavy object wrapped in a piece of velvet. I carefully unfolded the fabric. Lying in my palm was a pocket watch. It wasn't silver or gold, but a heavy, dark steel. I turned it over. On the back, an inscription had been carefully etched. It wasn't a name. It was a phrase, Ali's volat proprius. She flies with her own wings. I looked at Eve. Her face was illuminated by the fire, her expression one of rapt fascination. This wasn't the hoard of a bandit or the savings of a prospector. This was a life. A deliberate, thoughtful life, hidden away and preserved. We had not just found a shelter, we had stumbled upon a legacy. That night, with the fire crackling and Gus sleeping soundly at our feet, I opened the journal. The ink was faded but perfectly legible. The first entry was dated 20 years prior. The handwriting was precise, feminine. The cabin hadn't been built by a grizzled mountain man. It had been built by a woman. Her name was not mentioned, not at first. She referred to herself only in the context of her work. She was a botanist, an architect, a geologist. She had come to these mountains not to hide from the world, but to study it. The first pages were filled with calculations, with sketches of the cavern, with notes on the stability of the rock and the angle of the light from the fissure. She had designed the cabin herself, drafting the plans with the brass tools we had found. She wrote of hauling the timber up the mountain herself, board by board, with the help of a single, stubborn mule named Patience. She described the joy of notching the logs, the satisfaction of raising the walls, the quiet triumph of sleeping under a roof she had built with her own hands, protected by the greater roof of the mountain. She called the cavern the Great Quiet. As I read her words aloud, a portrait of this absent woman began to form. She was not lonely, she was solitary. She was not hiding, she was focused. She found a universe in the mosses that grew near the cave mouth, a history in the layers of rock, a symphony in the dripping water. She wrote about the mushrooms, calling them the ghosts of the stone, and included detailed drawings and notes on which were safe to eat. She had mapped the network of tunnels, discovering the very chamber that now fed us. It felt as if she had left us a guide, a map to our own survival. I turned a page and my breath caught. It was a drawing. A detailed, beautiful sketch of two women, twins, with a large, shaggy dog at their feet, standing before a broken wagon. It was us. It was impossible. My hand trembled, and I looked closer. It wasn't a drawing of us. It was a drawing for us. Beneath the sketch, the script changed. It was shakier, the hand of someone much older. If you are reading this, the entry began, then your journey has been hard, and you have found my quiet. Do not think of it as an end. I did not build this house as a monument to myself, but as a seed. A place for a new beginning. I have seen you in my dreams for years. I do not know your names or your faces, but I know your hearts. I know you are tired. Rest here. Let the mountain hold you. The world outside is loud, but here you can learn to hear yourself again. This house is not mine anymore. It is yours. I looked up at Eve. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling, a radiant, beautiful smile. The woman who built this place had not just left us a house. She had left us a blessing. She had reached across 2 decades to tell us we were not alone. And somehow, that felt like everything. Weeks turned into months. The world outside the cave was a distant memory, a story we no longer told. Our life was here, in the great quiet. The passing of time was marked not by a calendar, but by the slow, steady rhythm of our days. The shaft of light from the fissure was our clock, moving across the stone floor, marking morning, noon, and the descent into the soft, firelit evenings. We transformed the cabin. Using the knife from the wagon, we carved shells into the soft wood of the walls. We found clay near the water seep and, after many failed attempts, managed to fire a few lopsided bowls in the hottest part of the hearth. They were ugly, but they were ours. The biggest change came from the journal. The botanist had written about a specific type of moss that grew in a sunlit patch near the cave entrance. She called it earth hair and noted that its spores, if cultivated in the damp earth of the mushroom cave, could produce a phosphorescent fungus that glowed with a soft, green light. We followed her instructions, gathering the moss, drying it, and carefully seeding a patch of soil near the entrance to the mushroom tunnel. For weeks, nothing happened. We almost gave up. Then one morning, we saw it. A faint, greenish glow. By the end of the month, the entire tunnel was illuminated by a gentle, otherworldly light, a living lantern that banished the darkness and made our trips for mushrooms feel magical instead of daunting. Eve blossomed in this place. The silent, haunted girl I had dragged up the mountain was gone. In her place was a woman I had not seen since we were children, full of life and curiosity. She took the botanist's journal as her Bible, learning the names of the plants, the patterns of the stone. She began her own journal, using charcoal from the fire and the blank pages at the end of the leather-bound book. She sketched Gus as he slept. She sketched the way the light fell on the table. She sketched my hands as I mended our clothes. One day, I found her standing at the mouth of the cave, looking out at the jagged peaks. They no longer looked like teeth to me. They looked like guardians. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly, her first question about the world we'd left behind. The noise? The people? I thought for a moment. I thought of the crowded, dirty towns, the judgment in people's eyes, the constant struggle. "No," I said, and I was surprised by how true it was. "I don't." She turned to me, her eyes clear and bright. "Me neither," she said. I think I was born for the quiet in that moment. I knew we were no longer just hiding here. We were healing. The cabin was no longer a shelter. It was our world. And it was more than enough. I stand at the mouth of the cave, the cool morning air on my face. It must be autumn now. The wind carries a new scent of dry leaves and distant wood smoke, though our own fire is all we ever smell. Gus sits beside me, his muzzle grey, his body a little stiffer in the mornings, but his presence is as solid and comforting as the mountain itself. From inside the cabin, I can hear Eve humming, a tuneless, happy sound that has become the constant music of our lives. I look out at the same vista that once filled me with such profound despair. The peaks still claw at the sky, the landscape is still vast and unforgiving. But it is not my enemy anymore. It is my home. Everything is the same, and yet everything has changed. The change is in me. The hollow space in my chest has been filled, not with what we found here, but with what we have built. We have built a life from scratch, from a handful of beans and a spark. We have built a home in the heart of a mountain. We have rebuilt ourselves. The botanist's pocket watch is my constant companion. I don't use it to tell time. I hold it to remember. Ali's volat proprius. She flies with her own wings. We both do, now. We found our wings here, in the darkness, in the quiet. Eve comes to stand beside me, a steaming clay mug in each hand. She passes one to me. It's a tea she makes from the dried petals of a tough little mountain flower the journal calls stone bloom. It tastes of resilience. "It's a beautiful morning," she says. And it is. Not because the sun is shining or the sky is clear, but because we are here to see it. Because we are safe. Because we are together. We did not find a treasure in this cave. We found something far more valuable. We found peace. We found a strength we never knew we possessed. We found that the end of the trail was not an end at all, but the beginning of the path home. We often wonder about the woman who built this place, who dreamed of us long before we arrived. We will never know her name, but we honor her in the way we live, in the care we take with her legacy. She gave us more than a house, she gave us a second chance. And for that, we are eternally grateful. Maybe you, too, have a mountain to climb, a broken-down wagon in your past. Maybe you feel lost. But sometimes, the places that feel like the end of the world are just the beginning of a new one. All you have to do is keep going. And look for the quiet places. They are there. Waiting.